I still remember the sting of that moment as if it just happened. I had already lost my home, the place where every memory of my late husband and my son lived, to a storm that tore through my quiet town. I arrived at my son's doorstep, my heart heavy but hopeful, believing that at least family would be my shelter when everything else had been ripped away. Instead, I was met with a wall colder than the wreckage I had just crawled out of. I stood there clutching my bags, still smelling of smoke and mud, expecting to be pulled into an embrace. What I got was distance. My son looked at me with polite restraint, the kind of tone people use in offices, not at home. And then, the words came. Words that didn't sound like him but landed in my chest like shards of glass. Privacy. Space. Not now. His girlfriend hovered just behind him, her expression confirming what his voice didn't dare spell out. I wasn't welcome. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. After decades of giving, after raising him alone when my husband passed, after pouring everything I had into his future, I was left standing on a perfect porch in a perfect neighborhood, treated like an inconvenience. I felt smaller than the bags at my feet. My heart broke in a way the storm never managed to break me. I drove away with tears I refused to let fall until I was alone. How could family turn me away at the moment I needed them most? What did it mean about the bond I thought we had? The love I thought was unshakable that night in the silence of a borrowed car. I realized I needed to go back to the beginning, to the storm that left me with nothing, and to the choices that pushed me to my son's door in the first place. It all began with the tornado. It was just an ordinary afternoon, the kind I had lived through countless times in Kansas. I was standing in my kitchen, making a cup of tea the way I always did around 3 o'clock, when I noticed the light outside shift. The sky turned a sickly green, streaked with black, the kind of color that makes your stomach tighten even before the sirens begin. The air pressed down heavy, humming with a charge that made the hairs on my arms stand. Then the sirens wailed, that sound piercing, unrelenting cut straight through me. I grabbed the emergency radio, my hands trembling, and heard the words no one ever wants to hear. A large tornado was moving directly toward my neighborhood. They said we had 10 minutes. 10 minutes to choose what mattered most from a lifetime of living. I pulled out a suitcase, but couldn't think straight. My hands reached not for clothes or food, but for memories. My wedding photo with Richard, my son's baby pictures, my mother's pearls, a few documents, some jewelry, and the old sweater of my husband that still smelled faintly of him. I threw it all in a single bag and rushed to the basement. The house shuddered as if alive, fighting against the storm. The roar above was like a freight train ripping through the earth, the walls vibrating, the air thick with dust. I pressed myself into the corner, clutching that sweater like it could shield me. Then came the sound of wood splintering, glass exploding, metal twisting against itself. It felt endless, but then, silence. When I finally climbed the stairs, my knees nearly buckled. Where my living room had been was nothing but open sky. My rose garden was shredded, pieces of it scattered across the yard like confetti. The dining room table where birthdays were celebrated was wedged against what was left of the garage. My house, the place Richard had been so proud of, was gone. 40 years of living reduced to rubble in minutes. That night, I sat in the ruins, the weight of loss pressing so hard I could barely breathe. I thought of my son. Surely, if I had no house, no safety, he would open his door. Family had to mean something, didn't it? And so, with my heart heavy, I gathered what little was left and drove to his doorstep, hoping for comfort. I drove 45 minutes in silence, the hum of the borrowed car sounding louder than ever. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. With every mile, I told myself the same thing once I reached my son's house. I would finally feel safe. I would finally breathe. His neighborhood looked like something out of a glossy magazine. Broad streets, manicured lawns, houses so pristine they almost didn't look real. Pulling into his driveway, I felt like an intruder, dragging disaster into a world untouched by storms. My car still carried the scent of damp wood and mud, and I felt it clinging to me as I stepped out. At my feet sat 3 garbage bags and a battered suitcase, the last fragments of a life that had once been whole. The house itself was beautiful, with white shutters and a door painted deep red. I paused there, my heart pounding with both dread and hope. Before I could knock, the door opened. My son stood there, tall, neatly dressed, wearing a polite smile that felt rehearsed. Behind him appeared his girlfriend, immaculate in white jeans and a silk blouse, her hair tied in a perfect bun. Her eyes flicked to my bags, and I felt the weight of her silent judgment. Inside, the house gleamed. White sofas, glass tables, spotless windows. I was almost afraid to sit, as though my very presence might leave a mark. I tried to explain this would only be temporary, just until the insurance cleared, just until I found a small apartment. But even as the words left my mouth, I saw the glance they shared. A decision had already been made. They spoke of privacy, of long hours at work, of how their home was their sanctuary. They said it softly, almost gently, but the meaning cut straight through me. I wasn't welcome. My son offered a little money, as though that could soften the blow. But money couldn't replace the feeling of belonging. Money couldn't fill the hollow that opened inside me as I realized I was being pushed away by the very person I had once rocked to sleep and raised with everything I had. I nodded, thanked them, and gathered my things. Dignity kept me from breaking down in front of them, but inside I felt shattered. I walked back to the car, my body heavy with humiliation, my heart heavier still. As I drove away, the tears I had been holding back finally fell, hot and relentless. That night, I parked in a Walmart lot, the neon lights buzzing above me. I leaned the seat back and clutched my late husband's toolbox to my chest, trying to draw strength from its weight. I told myself it was only for one night, just one night, but deep down, I already knew this was only the beginning of surviving on my own. The first night in the Walmart parking lot felt endless. I leaned the seat back as far as it would go, but the steering wheel pressed into my knees and the cold crept in through every seam of the car. The neon lights buzzed above me, harsh and unrelenting, and I tried to convince myself it was only temporary, just one night until I figured something out. But when dawn came and the lot filled with shoppers, reality settled in. This wasn't a pause. This was my life now. I washed up in the store restroom, splashing cold water on my face, praying no one would notice the tired woman taking too long at the sink. I dabbed my hair with paper towels, brushed my teeth while staring at the cracked edge of the mirror, and walked out with a forced smile, as though I belonged there. That smile hurt more than anything, because it felt like a mask I couldn't take off. Food became another quiet humiliation. I bought the cheapest things I could, day-old bread, instant noodles. dollar coffee that tasted like bitterness itself. I ate alone in the car, windows fogged from my breath, staring out at families who laughed as they loaded groceries into trunks. Their lives looked so normal, so secure, and I felt like I was watching through glass from the outside of the world I once belonged to. The loneliness gnawed at me most. At night, when the lot went quiet, I thought about the decades I had spent building a home, raising a son, sacrificing every part of myself so he could grow up safe and cared for. And now, here I was, invisible, unwanted, parked between shopping carts and strangers' cars. The shame was crushing, like a weight pressing me deeper into the seat. But even in the rubble of my spirit, I clung to scraps of dignity. I folded my clothes neatly in a bag. I whispered prayers into the dark. I told myself I was still human, even if the world treated me like a shadow. One evening, rummaging through my suitcase, I found an envelope that had slipped into a side pocket. Inside was a faded business card, worn soft at the edges. The name on it made my breath catch. It was from someone I hadn't seen in decades, someone I had once loved. I sat there in the dim glow of the parking lot, running my finger over the ink, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the smallest spark of something I thought I had lost hope. I sat in the car with the business card in my hand, the edges frayed and yellowed like an artifact from another lifetime. My first love, David. I hadn't spoken his name out loud in decades, but the letters on that card felt alive under my fingertips. For a long while, I just stared at it, my mind tangled in hesitation. What if the number didn't work anymore? What if he didn't remember me? Or worse, what if he did and resented me for the way life had pulled us apart? I told myself not to be foolish, not to build hope out of something as fragile as ink on paper. Yet the card kept pulling me in, whispering promises of warmth in a world that had gone so cold. My heart thudded in my chest as I pulled out my phone. The numbers blurred as tears welled in my eyes. I pressed each button slowly, half expecting myself to stop before the last digit. The line rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Every ring stretched like an eternity. I almost hung up, my hand shaking. But then I heard it, a voice I hadn't heard since youth, softened with age, but still unmistakably his. In that instant, my throat closed. I could barely form words, but he knew. He recognized me by the sound of my breath, the way my silence carried memories. The warmth in his voice wrapped around me like a blanket I had been denied for too long. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight in my chest loosen. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask why it had been so long. He just asked where I was. I gave him the truth sitting in a Walmart parking lot. Homeless, broken, unsure of tomorrow. My voice cracked with shame. But he answered with something I hadn't felt in so long: care. He told me to stay put, that he was coming right away. The minutes crawled, but eventually headlights swept across the lot, and then he was there, standing by my car door. His hair was silver now, his face lined with years, but his eyes were exactly the same, steady, kind, filled with recognition. When he reached for me, I nearly collapsed into his arms. All the pain I had been holding back poured out in sobs I couldn't control, and he didn't let go. He whispered that I was safe now, that I wasn't alone anymore. His voice carried no judgment, only tenderness, like time had folded back on itself to return me to a place I thought was lost forever. That night, sitting beside him, I felt something I thought I'd never feel again: hope. Fragile? Yes, but real. For the first time since the storm took my home, since my own son turned me away, I believed there could still be a new beginning. And as he guided me into his car, I knew I was about to step into a chapter I never expected. One filled not with endings, but with the chance to rediscover love and stability. When I first stepped into David's home, I carried with me the weight of every sleepless night in that Walmart parking lot. My hands trembled as I set down the small bag of belongings I had managed to salvage, afraid to take up too much space, afraid this warmth might vanish just as quickly as it appeared. But David's kindness filled every corner. The house itself was simple, lived in, filled with touches of his life books stacked on side tables, photographs lining the hallway, the faint smell of coffee that seemed to linger even in the evenings. The first morning, he poured me a cup before I could even ask, sliding it across the table with a quiet smile that said more than words could. That small gesture unraveled a knot inside me I didn't know was still clenched. At first, I was cautious. I moved lightly, offering to clean, to cook, to make myself useful. Yet he never treated me like a burden. Instead, he welcomed the little routines we began to share. We would walk slowly through his garden, the air scented with roses and earth, our footsteps crunching on the gravel paths. He would point out which flowers had survived the winter, and I would listen, marveling not just at the plants, but at the fact that I was still here to see them. Cooking together became another quiet joy. I would chop vegetables while he stirred sauces, our movements weaving around each other in a dance that felt oddly familiar, as if we had done this for years. Evenings often ended with us sitting side by side on the porch, watching the sun dip low. In those still moments, I could feel the pieces of myself knitting back together. What surprised me most was how natural it felt to laugh again. We would reminisce about our youth, about the places we once dreamed of, about the silly things we used to do. His presence didn't erase my pain, but it gave me a place to set it down, even for a little while. Slowly, I began to see myself differently, not just as a widow, not just as a woman cast aside by her own child, but as someone still worthy of love and tenderness. With every shared meal, every gentle touch, every look that said I was seen, I started to believe in my own value again. For the first time in so long, I felt safe. I felt cherished. And though my heart finally rested in that peace, I could not ignore the sense that life was not finished testing me. Because just as I was learning to breathe freely again, I knew the quiet I had found was about to be stirred by the reappearance of my son. The silence from my son had stretched on for weeks after he turned me away. I had forced myself to accept it, to live with the ache of knowing he had chosen his own comfort over me. But then, suddenly, his number lit up my phone. At first, the calls were light, short check-ins, a quick, just thinking of you. My heart wanted to believe he had changed, that he had realized what I meant to him. Yet, beneath the soft tone, there was something too polished, too careful. It didn't take long for the questions to shift. He wanted to know where I was living, how I was getting by. When I mentioned David, his voice lifted in a way I hadn't heard in years. He asked about the house, about the kind of man David was, about whether we were serious. Each question felt like a hand reaching, not for me, but for something that surrounded me. I tried to push away the thought, but I could feel it. His sudden concern had a shadow. Not long after, packages began to arrive. His girlfriend sent them, neatly wrapped, with cards that spoke of family and forgiveness. Expensive candles, designer scarves, little trinkets meant to smooth over what words could not. I held them in my hands, the paper crisp beneath my fingers, and felt more distance than closeness. These weren't gifts of love, they were tokens of strategy. Inside me, a war raged. I am a mother. I have spent my life loving him unconditionally, sacrificing, giving without keeping score. That part of me still longed to take his face in my hands and believe every gesture was genuine. But another part, the part that had slept in a cold car and washed my face in a Walmart restroom while he shut his door, knew better. I began to notice the way my stomach tightened whenever he called, the way my chest sank when his girlfriend's name appeared on a package. Their voices carried a sweetness that felt rehearsed, and yet I could not fully shut the door on them. A mother's love is a stubborn thing, it clings, even when it bleeds. David noticed the change in me. He didn't say much, but I could see it in his eyes. The way he studied me after each call. The way he quietly set aside the unopened gifts piling up in the corner. I knew he sensed what I did, that this sudden closeness was not born from love, but from something colder. Still, I tried to hold the pieces of both truths in my heart, the hope that my son wanted me back, and the fear that he only wanted what surrounded me now. Each call left me more unsettled, each gift more hollow. By the time my son suggested visiting us for dinner, my heart was already bracing itself. I felt the air thicken, heavy with unspoken truths, and deep down, I knew the calm in David's home was about to break. The dinner table looked perfect that night, candles flickering, silverware lined up neatly, plates filled with food that smelled like comfort. But beneath the polished surface, the air was heavy. My son sat across from me, his girlfriend beside him, both smiling too brightly. At first, their words felt casual, but I could sense the undercurrent. His questions returned about the house, the business, the way David lived. Each one came wrapped in politeness, but the edges cut sharp. I tried to answer gently, to keep peace, though my stomach knotted tighter with every passing moment. I could feel David's eyes on me, calm but steady, as if he had already made up his mind. Then, without raising his voice, he turned the tide. He spoke with a firmness that filled the room, calling out what I had been too afraid to admit. He told my son that love was not measured in property or status, that a mother was not a burden to be discarded and then reclaimed when convenient. His words carried no anger, only truth, and somehow that truth felt heavier than any outburst could have. My son shifted in his seat, his smile faltering, his girlfriend glancing nervously at him. For a moment, no one moved. I sat frozen, caught between shame and relief. Shame that my own child had to be corrected by someone else, and relief that finally, someone was standing for me when I had been too weak to stand for myself. Inside, emotions collided: fear that the distance between us would never close, guilt that I had failed as a mother, and a strange, quiet gratitude that David's voice had carried what mine could not. The silence that followed his words felt endless, pressing down on all of us. I looked at my son then, searching for a trace of the boy I once held in my arms. What I saw instead was a man unprepared to face the mirror placed before him. His eyes dropped, his hands fidgeted with the edge of his napkin, and for the first time, I realized the truth might never change him. The dinner ended with no raised voices, no slammed doors, just a stillness that spoke louder than chaos ever could. As I cleared the plates with trembling hands, I knew something inside me had shifted. This was not just a confrontation. It was a reckoning. And though my heart ached, it also knew the time had come to reflect on what love, family, and self-respect truly meant. When I look back on everything that has happened, it feels like a lifetime lived in a matter of months. I went from losing my home in a storm to losing the comfort of family I thought I could always rely on. My son's rejection was a wound deeper than any destruction the tornado left behind. To feel like I no longer had a place in his world broke something inside me. But life has a way of showing us where true love really lives. In my darkest hour, when I was alone in a parking lot with nothing but a car to shelter me, I found a piece of my past that became my future again. That old business card led me back to someone who saw me, not as a burden, but as a woman worth cherishing. His love reminded me that even when the people we give everything to turn away, there are still those who will hold us with kindness and dignity. The confrontation at the dinner table was painful, but it was also necessary. It forced truth into the open that respect and compassion cannot be bought.